all
Yeah.
organizations are doing.
Yeah, it was very, very awesome to have that kind of interaction.
Some of those guys, like Jim Jag, like
Yeah.
HPE, one of HPE guys. There's a few others like that.
Yeah.
They really, you can tell they care about.
What was that? We were at the happy hour and he did this, yell out to traffic control to the entire team. He stopped the whole bar. It was kind of cool.
The whole bar. Pretty cool.
All right, ready?
Yep.
So as I was going through this originally, I was like, well, you guys are, domain experts, but maybe not. So I'm going to give the talk as I gave it, so sorry for any of the repetition I've done on the Comcast side. So we do our rehearsals and also anyone that knows, but hopefully this is going to be a good build up to the actual thing you're probably going to want to care about, which is, Docker and CDNs.
You want a question at the end or as we go?
Good point. I always forget that. Let's keep the questions at the end because I think that you're going to find that most of those questions are going to land on the Docker side as we build up to it. But at the conference, I pointed this out. I tried to get more people to come in. If you wanted to follow along, just hit that bit.ly. So that way, because you get a lot of screenshots of people doing it in the audience. So I decided to sort of help facilitate that. And then I also try to bring people in the community and as far as this ATC Up and Running channel, my hope was to have a larger audience so we could have interaction in the channel and questions there so that we could go back and pick the top 3 questions, so we could sort of streamline that. So getting into what I'm going to talk about in the agenda, so I'll do a brief overview in history. I felt like what Dave and I did, as well as Jeff, we did a lot of great overlap in terms of the explanations of what traffic control is, as well as giving an interesting background on how we got here. So that I'm going to go briefly into that. Then I go into the actual traffic control component details. So you'll get to see sort of every single component in a high-level view. And then as we build up toward the end, we'll sort of have some interaction with Docker, and then Dan will start to take over and explain, all these things that I'm describing in more detail in the Docker components themselves. So the first question you have to ask yourself, what is a CDN? Because a lot of people don't know what a CDN is. They surf the web every day, and they don't really understand that CDNs are a driving component behind that. So one of the key components that we have is, where we wanted to go was why build a CDN. So in the original days, it was, we knew the tsunami of bits were coming within Comcast, and we knew that we wanted to optimize those bits. And we knew what CDNs were, so we were like, hey, we have all this infrastructure, why not do it? So we did. And it was very interesting to see that progress. Then we sort of evolved, as you all know, because I'll mention things like 12 monkeys and CCR, because you'll see that in the code base potentially and maybe some of the data sets. But that's really sort of where the product began. And then, of course, we came up with traffic control. What was traffic control? It was more of the larger suite of the CDN, and it sort of became our brand that we built so that we could actually introduce this to Apache as a solid and cohesive product. So traffic control, when did it start? It started back in 2012, and we were up and running really quickly. We're lean and mean, what, 5 delivery services, 100 delivery services. That was the glory days of the CDN. And then we went to production with it pretty quickly. But then if you really fast forward through time, back in 2018, we've come a long way if you look at where we are. And then ATC becomes obviously a top level project. So that was a huge win for all the licensing and all the things that we had to go through to ensure that we're quality. I won't go too much into this. You'll see the information out there because this is tailored to ApacheCon so that they could understand more about our community. But the latest number, as I depicted it, was 9567 commits, which I think is a lot of commits in terms of your average project. And if you're interested, you go visit the GitHub page, which most of you probably know or not. I went through high level of the releases. I didn't go into details. 2.2 was the latest stable, obviously, and then 3 we're sitting on now, which November is our target. But then now, one of the initial goals that we had with the CDN was everything commodity off the shelf. We're not going to put ourselves locked into any vendor ever, which means that the software itself had to be open and communicable. So we went through this whole fine-tooth comb process to actually get our software up to snuff, which was not an easy task. There's a lot of, does this license any work? Oh, that dependency is no longer valid because the license is bad. So we spent quite a bit of time on that road to get to open source to help make these goals achievable. Of course, the last one is extremely scalable. How do you get scalable? Stateless. And that's something I'll talk about a little bit later when we get into Traffic Router. But the key thing was as less state as possible because that means a lot of overhead to manage it. So some of the key features, I'm not going to go in the depth there because this is, again, the 50,000 view perspective. But we do client routing. We have the ability with client steering and some components we'll talk about. And then we have this aspect called operations administration. So we have a dashboard where somebody can go in and actually control and manage the CDN from a central location. And then what about monitoring in the caches? We need to know if our caches are healthy or not. We need to know if they are going up or down or just bring them down for normal maintenance. So I'll start to dive in with the components. Traffic operations, what is it? It is that dashboard. In the original days, it was built in Perl Modulicious, but then over time, we're evolving more toward an Angular front end with Traffic Portal, and then separating the API and making the API of Traffic Ops more of a first-class citizen. So you're going to see that, as we move forward in the major releases. And the fact that, in 3.0, we're deprecating it, it's sort of a sad day, but, the old jQuery UI black thing is now officially dead. So hopefully we'll get lots more contributions in the Traffic Portal side. So before we dive into the next thing with the portal, I sort of also wanted to bring up a topic, and what our terms are. So what is a delivery service? A delivery service is, and I've said this term because that's how I think about it, but it's a delivery lane of bits for your specialized needs as a customer. That's pretty more or less it. Somebody might say, well, what is a delivery lane? Well, it really is just something that's a slice of our CDN so that it allow you to utilize it. So then when you talk about delivery service, your next question is, what are parameters? Well, parameters are everything that you'd know in programming is key value pairs. But we use these key value pairs in very specialized ways to help deliver, which is really what this is, the config files down to the caches. Then what are profiles? Well, that's just grouping of those parameters. That gives us the ability to basically port them, manage them, centralize them, and do fancy things on the CDN, basically. Now, I didn't go into cache groups, which we're all familiar with, and everybody's like, what's going on with that? But remember the audience as I'm going through this. So at this point, I'm going to sort of hand this over to Dan, but before I do that, I'm going to point out two key components here, what nobody have ever seen before, that was needed to sort of get this off the ground. The first component is the enroller. The original incarnation of the enroller was basically to help with bridging the gap between the Docker networking and the host networking, right? I want to be able to hit a DNS entry and show that, oh, this component or container is now registered in Traffic Ops. So that's really what it is. It's just a bridge between the Docker containers being registered as Traffic Ops servers. It's because obviously the CDN needs that to know how to deliver configs. And the second component, which we found that we needed later, but we didn't, we scrambled toward the end because we had to get this presentation out. So, but we had huge help from the audience here to get this thing called DNS routing in place. And really what it is it's the gap between the DNS needs of the internal DNS for Docker and bridging it across into the host so that you could actually get access to the DNS aspects because that's key to our routing. So here I'll let Dan talk over the demo with Traffic Ops.
There we go. Okay.
There.
How's the size on that?
Can you read that, Jeff Bevel?
You
Can you see that?
got one more?
Yeah,
Okay.
One more?
One bigger?
One bigger.
I bet your window a little smaller because your text is too low. Yep.
Better?
On the- this side.
I'm going to raise
Are you
up
gonna
the
explain
volume
the
here a
prompts?
little bit.
Another hour.
That's lightning talk. Okay, so we created the this CDN in a box as what we call it, under the infrastructure directory within traffic control. And this is all in master currently, so it is something you can try out yourself, and have questions on it. Just bring them up on Slack. I'll be happy to try to help you work through it. The first part of the CDN in a box is a Docker Compose file, which describes each of the components that we have in there, which you can see they're all the familiar ones, the edge traffic control, traffic monitor, traffic router. But right now, I'm just going to bring up traffic ops, which has as dependencies the database and the enroller. So those will automatically come up as well. And so I have all of the images already created. Otherwise, we'd be waiting for a half hour for Perl modules to load. But just show one other part of it. This is the output of the enroller, which is basically a service that takes a JSON file for any one of the different components that we have, CDNs, users, cache groups, and automatically creates that, registers it within traffic ops. And I can show you, I have a little alias here for that wraps a curl with a authorization. Just to show you that the stuff is actually registered there. So this is just hitting one of the endpoints of traffic ops directly, so you can see that it's actually registered there. But with that, I'm going to hand it back to Dwayne.
Okay. So you saw traffic ops, and he demonstrated the API, which was appropriate because, as I mentioned before, the traffic ops system is sort of evolving to be more API centric. And then traffic portal. What is traffic portal? Traffic portal is basically the new skin, if you will, to interact with those APIs. It's written in AngularJS, and it's very nice and thin, and when it runs on its own container within the Docker component set. We typically run it separated, but there's nothing preventing you from running it all in the same box. So as Dan starts to bring this up gradually, I'll start to talk about the components. And if you look, the next thing we'll talk about is traffic monitor and traffic portal, I just said. But then as you see here, the enroller is, as we bring these components up, registering, if you will, each container in the traffic ops. And then at this point, I'll show traffic portal with Dan.
There we go. Okay. So I just do a Docker Compose PS. You can see the components that are currently running, which I've separated out the traffic ops and traffic ops Perl just because we know that the Perl is going to go away eventually, so we can have the Go version take over completely and eliminate that other part. But since those are already up, I can now also bring up traffic portal and traffic monitor. You can see that you can basically just give each one of the components on the command line. It'll bring up any one of the anything that that those also depend on. Bring that up, and so we now have traffic monitor and traffic portal added. So go back to here, and there we have traffic portal. There we go. And I can show, oh, just wanted to show the servers real quick. So that all of the containers that we have running are now listed under the servers and the origin.
So then at this point, I was working with Dan to sort of describe, with a demo of a UI, how our traffic control components are sort of set up, right? We know that we set up a CDN. We start to work our way down with servers. We attach them to cache groups. We know profiles and parameters. Let's go to the delivery service page. And
Quick question.
yeah,
The servers under the servers page, did they get in there automatically? Did they like register themselves?
That's what the enroller
that's what the
does.
enroller does.
That's what the enroller does. All right, thank
Right.
So when you first started up Traffic Ops, it ran through the seeds file, right?
Yep.
It gave you the types,
Yes.
the statuses, all kind of the base data.
Yes.
And then the enroller went through and said, I'm going to create a CDN, I'm going to create some
Okay.
servers.
It was the dynamic data that needed the IP address space from Docker.
Did it create any delivery services? Or
It did
Yeah.
create one,
create
yes.
one
Right.
for you?
Yeah, so this was a demo delivery service that got created as well. And the enroller, we can go into detail in the deeper dive, but it basically consumes JSON files and throws them over the wire.
And that
Okay.
is what is gonna replace the cable top example later. Is that what you were saying?
We're
on our
We're
end?
thinking, yeah, we're thinking that.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
So basically at this point, I was talking about what a delivery service is in a little more detail, pointing out the fact that the key is what we sort of use in combination with, yeah. The combination of the key, the CDN name, and obviously, as you show up to our CDN, we need to know your origin. So you plug that into this field for the origin server base URL. And then what happens is at the bottom here, we'll get a delivery service URL that we will hand off to our customer to say, if you go through this, then you'll be going through our CDN, right? And so the combination of that plus the routing name, which I forgot to mention,
It's under advanced.
It's under advanced.
that one always goes to find.
Scroll down.
Right, so the routing name, the delivery service name, the CDN name, and then the domain name that we set up to capture all those requests for routing purposes is what we use to communicate how to get into our CDN. So then at this point, let's go back to the demo or the slides.
Slides, okay.
Right, so you saw Traffic Portal. All the interaction you saw with the UI was interacting with the Traffic Ops API. And then now we have this new component that we don't know about called ORT. And what ORT is a lot of people didn't even know what it stood for. It was Operational Readiness Test.
It was a thing 10 years
It was a
ago.
thing
It
10
was a
years
real
ago.
thing.
But it
We
seeped,
did that.
it definitely seeped in as a thing in traffic control. But ultimately what it does, it's just it's a Perl script, soon to be a Python script, which we're sort of improving with, that basically wakes up on a regularly scheduled program, pulls down the APIs that are needed based upon the current host that's running from, and delivers the config files down for ATS, which I did talk about at Apache Con before, but ATS is Apache Traffic Server, and that's our cache that we're delivering config files for. Then we have Traffic Monitor. What is Traffic Monitor? Traffic Monitor, in my mind, acts as a sidecar, which we'll talk about Traffic Router, but it's basically a component that goes and pulls the caches and ensures their health. And then there's this topic called the health protocol that we utilize to figure out if that cache is healthy or not. If it's not healthy, then it's considered unhealthy, then we take it out of rotation. And when we say take it out of rotation, it's just it no longer serves as a cache on our CDN. And then next is the demo for the Traffic Monitor.
Okay. Yes. Traffic monitor is. Display. That up. Yeah, I know. Did it automatically. Force it to go 80.
Used to be.
Nope.
Yep, then my God's
Okay.
bit us again.
Monitor is running. So don't have anything to show for traffic monitor at the moment, but let's just continue on.
So before we get into really what I would say is the heart of our CDN called Traffic Router, I wanted to bring up the topic of consistent hash. So earlier I mentioned, how do we make this scalable? Well, this is a key algorithm that we use to ensure that we have the stateless aspect of our scalability. Basically what a consistent hash ring is the ability to know that if this cache goes down, I can sort of avoid it with my routing pattern. And I won't go into details of that because I'll be stealing Mr. Elslow's thunder. But basically, this is something that's important to understand that we use as a key term in our CDN. Now the traffic router. So traffic router is a Tomcat service that spins up and it collects all the data that it needs to sort of understands how to route traffic. A couple of key features that it does is the number one is it's an authoritative DNS. And you're like, what? An authoritative DNS with a Java component? But that's what we do. And so by doing that, by hooking it into a DNS, we have the ability to do fancy routing internally. We have sort of two major types of delivery services, one being HTTP and the other being HTTPS. And Traffic Router helps us with doing that routing for any of our customers' needs. And obviously, as a router, in terms of the name, it's a dispatcher. It takes the request in and dispatches it over to a cache. And oh, by the way, we know where you are because we have an IP database, which we'll get into a little deeper later. But the main thing is that router is the heart, as well as I would consider Traffic Ops and Traffic Portal is more or less the brains. So now I gave this example sort of to show how a routing example might work. If I were sitting in Florida and I hit that URL that I was given, and I would automatically be routed based upon where I was to some local traffic routers that looks like they're over in Tennessee. Now, if I get my first request through, the first thing that's going to happen is that the cache is empty, right? I don't have that content stored anywhere. So the edge says, oh, I don't have it. I'm going to go down another layer in what I sort of refer to as an onion, the edges, the midges, and the origins that you show up with. So then basically it goes all the way back to the origin, and then on its way out, each of these caches get a copy of that request. So that if I'm coming from, say, Michigan using that URL, then I don't have to go all the way back to the origin. I can just pull that content off the closest edge cache that is in support of where you are. So now there's this diagram that lives on our documentation. It's extremely detailed, but it's sometimes hard to sort of digest as a brand new user. So considering the audience, I sort of broke this up into different sort of flows as you know it. So the first interaction would be, I as a user would go into Traffic Portal, interact with my delivery services, my caches, my servers that are there, and then set up a delivery service, and then Traffic Ops API pulls that data out of a Postgres database. Then a more complicated example is now that I got that URL because I went into Traffic Ops or Portal and set that up, the next thing I want to do is use it, right? So I pull content through that URL, which hits the local DNS server. Well, and the fact that our traffic router is now an authoritative DNS in that DNS server list, or that tree, he knows to capture the CIB test domain. Then at that point, we know that because my CDN that you configured in Traffic Ops or Portal sort of is used to build that domain set, then Traffic Router says, oh, okay, I'm going to respond with this, and then what's going to happen is the client gets the interaction of a 302 redirect. So this is an example of an HTTP delivery service. Then you get routed to that same sort of onion flow, but at a high level, this is how Traffic Router manages the DNS for us. Now, if I'm a DNS delivery service, then the only real difference is Traffic Router knows where you are. He knows that you, because you came in on that route, that you should go to this edge directly. So, and there are some cases we have delivery services set up that don't have the ability to do a 302 redirect, as well as we want to control that. So you can see the difference there, right? No 302 redirect. And then traffic router, in and of itself, has the ability to sort of wake up and then collect all the data, as I mentioned earlier. So he goes to traffic ops and pulls a set of data. He goes to the GeoIP server because that's where our MaxMine IP database is. So he needs that information. Then he also interacts directly with this one API, which you're like, why is this one different than the others? Well, that's a key one that we have. And it goes through Traffic Monitor to get that, because Traffic Monitor also needs information for that. So to make sure we have synchronous and not race conditions against traffic ops, we sort of go get that information from Traffic Monitor so that they're in conjunction with that information. The other components that we have, as I said, ORT config polling is pretty simple. Each of our mids and edges have this cron job running. It wakes up, pulls down the config data, and delivers it, as well as does an ATS restart for us, so that, or reload, so that we get the new version of the config files that were pulled down. And then at this point, I'll start hand this back to Dan, but we'll start to bring up more and more of the CDN as we go.
Okay. So at this point, we have most of the components already running. I'm just going to allow it to bring up everything else. Component. There we go. Okay, you can see it's added now traffic router, traffic vault, as well as, that's okay. That one that's exited is actually just a temporary image that is sort of the parent of the edge and mid, so it's okay that that's exited. So we have an edge, we have a mid, and we have an origin. The client up here is actually a SOX proxy that allows us to use the cib.test domain directly on my browser. And I'm going to just show the.
It's more of a challenge with Mac OS, as we found, than with Linux to run this, because Linux gives you more fine-grained controls over your routing over Mac.
Okay. So I can hand it back. I'm just going to go ahead and.
Okay. So he brought up all the components, so I'll sort of skip through some of those and move on to traffic stats. So traffic stats came on a little bit later, and as our CDN grew, and really what it does is it mines data out of Traffic Monitor, because, as I said earlier, Traffic Monitor knows about all the caches and their health, and does more or less data roll-up, so that we can see the nice mountain chart of our CDN data and a few others. But the key thing to take away from it, as by the name, is that it gathers statistics about the CDN. Traffic Vault. What is Traffic Vault? So, as I mentioned earlier, we have HTTP delivery services and we have HTTPS delivery services. And what that really means is we have the ability to manage those delivery services under TLS. So, obviously, if you're doing TLS, you need SSL keys. So, under the covers, Traffic Vault is React, which that might change in the future. But at the moment, that's where we keep all the SSL keys, including DNSSEC keys, which is another key component of Traffic Router. That's where we store all those behind an API set. Then as we're sort of building up the CDN, at this point, I would overview the origin. Obviously, the origin is, in our case, a little Lighty server. And we have some actual assets behind it that would play. And at this point, I would sort of talk about the future development. So some of the key things we're really after is streamlining that flow of sort of taking that ops guy out of the picture. We're a bigger CDN now. We need to have the ability to do self-service. So what that's going to do is empower our customers to do more in their own realm. Logging analytics, we are still striving to get that open source version of logging analytics, you know, as we all sort of live off of Splunk. So the hope is that we'll have an elk stack of some like, you know, that we'll really be using, and then we can feed back into the community. Pattern-based consistent hashing, this is a new feature that's coming that will basically allow us to do more finer grain hashing on our routes. So think of it as a regex on the route and being able to pick and choose what parts of that route I want to use for my consistent hashing. URL signing, we worked with our community to get this in place. So it's obviously a draft, but we do have this feature that's I think in place now, isn't it, Chris, as of recent?
Yeah, it's currently an internet draft. We're hoping it'll go last call at this
Right.
next upcoming IETF.
Right.
It's open sourced as a plugin for the ATS team, and is available inside ATC.
Of course, we live and breathe on Apache Traffic Server. It's been great for us, but we also have Grove, which I failed to mention earlier, is a proof of concept Go project that we're embedded as a sort of a test initially, but we're going to hopefully use it more for linear. But we're also going to look at others. We're going to look at Nginx and any other caches and make traffic control a bit more agnostic about the caches that we put in place. Then, of course, everybody's looking forward toward H2, HTTP push and pull.
Did you want to talk about the final DNS part of the CDN in the box?
Actually, yes. Mr. Bevel has been instrumental to helping us get over the hump. So is Brendan, which I misspelled it in the last time, Pike. You guys stand up real quick, because I want to definitely recognize your efforts at the end, because you put a lot of time and effort to help us make this project or this presentation a success. And then Rob Butts, because he was the one that sort of started Docker back in the day. It just sort of never got anywhere. It floundered. I know Cox is doing some Docker, but the hope for this effort is this is going to be more of a formal approach. And back to the vinyl DNS. So as I mentioned earlier, we're using the Bind DNS open source server at one point, but Comcast has now opened our DNS to this new project called Vinyl DNS. And what it basically is an API-driven way for building your DNS, which dovetailed nicely with what we're going to do with Docker CD in the box. So now we should be able to dynamically add DNS entries, because at the moment for the demo, they're all sort of static, so that we could have some predictable results. At this point, I guess, any questions?
For the DNS, would that also allow you to do things like if you ever had to change the delegation, if you ever had to change like the NS record, could you have like API calls into it to
Yes.
assist in like migrations and stuff?
Yes, it has the ability to flexibly interact with your DNS.
There's a UI on top of Vinyl DNS.
Correct.
Basically, it's a whole management framework for DNS, and you can have all of your things
Yes.
in there and manage your delegation.
So it's open sourced
Okay.
under the Comcast umbrella. So just go search around on GitHub, you should be able to find it.
Yeah, like if you were a Comcast employee and you wanted to go create sandman.comcast.net, you would use this tool to do that and
Okay.
insert all of the records
Yes.
in it if you wanted to.
We're going to see the final hurrah, right?
Yep.
And it is relevant to note as well that at the moment it is not itself a
So
DNS
is it healthy?
server.
Yep.
It is simply
Okay.
an API on top of existing defined zones.
So now,
Okay.
so now that, I'm sorry to interrupt, but yeah, and we'll get to your question next, but we want to do the sort of the final drum roll. I think we're at that point now. So Dan's going to show us a demo of a working CDN all on his laptop, interacting with an asset.
So, as you can see, I went to, using the URL that we have in the traffic portal, I brought up our content from our origin. Bring that, get that bigger. Just bringing up the developer tools. You can see, based on the ATS hash. See traffic. Swapping back and forth between full screen and not is traffic server. Go to our handy via header parser. I can paste that value in there, and this shows that it's a miss. This shows that it's a miss on the cache, so, and it was written into the cache. And if I go back to here and force a reload on that. I can copy this via header again. If I can get there. Go back to the via decoder, paste that in there. And this time it was a hit. So it actually did pull it from the edge cache. And one more thing to show. The Wizard of Oz that you've never seen.
Yeah, this is the 1910 version. So we were looking for public domain assets so we could play it. This sort of was one of the smaller ones that we found, but it is also somewhat comical because you're like, wow, I didn't even know this existed. So
And it's super creepy.
yeah, it's super creepy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As you can see,
We-
as this is going through, you can see each of the pieces coming through, and they are being cached.
Right, so you can see the manifest and all the fragments playing, and these are all being pulled down locally from the Docker system.
And just to add to it, I'm going to stop the origin.
This is crazy talk.
There we go. And you can see the origin is now stopped. Go back to here. It actually still has more of a buffer there. Let's see if we can get it to where it stops.
So Dan has a flag turned on that if I bring up developer tools, there's no browser caching, because I know that's the first thing you're thinking. But we disabled that local browser caching, so you could see that the actual ATS caches are delivering those bits.
And it's reached the end of the video that the origin has provided. So I'm just going to tell it to reload. So now it's gone back and is it's pulling all of that information directly from the cache.
Yep.
The origin is still stopped.
So go back to questions. Jan?
Yeah, is this going to be something that you guys are signing up to support and do releases of?
So one of the hopes for this is not just can we do this. The hopes are can we actually use this for education? Can we bring on more people in our community with us?
Yeah.
Can we use it for testing internally? So we want to hook this up to a lot of automated testing
Yeah.
to sort of be the first line of safety net defense against any bugs that are creeping into our software.
But I think what we've done in the past a lot, and maybe I should say what I've done in the past a lot, is build something like this. Cable time example is a good one, and then
Yeah.
walk away from it and
Right.
it dies, right?
Right.
So what I'm asking from you guys is,
Yeah.
are you signing up to keep supporting this and to drive?
We want this to be the
towards
reference
CI/CD?
application for our CDN.
Yeah.
The plan is currently for us to leverage this in the development lifecycle,
Yeah.
so we use
Continuous
this
integration.
But I think
environment
also
early on.
we should get Apache to give us some infrastructure to host this, so that on every build
Yes.
or every
Yeah.
PR, we run this thing, you get.
But not only just that, but like I as a developer, I want the ability to use this. Maybe I'm developing a Go route, but I want to have a traffic portal. I don't want to install those components. So there is a way you can, through configuration, sort of use your local host as your development environment, but dovetail that into the flow for
Yeah.
the testing
So I
or development
think
you're working
For
on.
next summit, I'm gonna sign you two guys up, where you're gonna be presenting how this is completely automated into CI/CD.
Sure.
And how we basically do a PR and bang, it builds a CDN with this.
Yeah.
And you can test it that way. And if it doesn't work, then thumbs down on that.
The other thing that we hope to do is introduce a Docker registry, because as Dan said, depending on your machine, it might take you 30 to 45 minutes. But if something comes into master, there's nothing preventing us from putting these in a registry that we just point to,
And I think
and I can download them immediately.
we can get Apache to help with that a little bit as well, right? Yeah, they have some infrastructure that they can help with that.
Right.
I also wanted to mention Hank was talking to me earlier. They've got a setup using LXC rather than using Docker, and found some advantages to doing that. So we're going to get together and discuss that a bit more.
So Steve, you had a question?
Yeah, so is this the Docker image based on the RPM, or do you actually build all the components?
That's a very good question. So one of the initial requirements was, we have this nice package we put on our production environment. This feeds in as input to Docker. So the first thing you have to do to run this, you got to collect whatever RPM you want to install, or set of RPMs, right, for each of the components.
Okay. And is there a plan to kind of decouple this, like, being able to build maybe?
So because of that, right, I felt like this should be more of an education, right? Let's get some understanding around what it is. And then when we realize, oh, the Docker registry is really what our RPM is, then maybe we can start to think about better ways to do that. But initially, we wanted RPMs because everybody loves their RPMs. We wanted
Well, I'm just
to
thinking
stay
about the
around
build
that.
process. Like now you got to build
Yes.
the RPM, then kind of build the container.
No, so when I'm developing, right, if I don't care about the component,
Yeah.
I'll pull down the RPM and let it do its thing. But locally, I don't rebuild that container or the image. I'm working and trying to dovetail through my local environment so I can do quicker iterations.
And I think that's an area that we need to focus on improving both how it works and our knowledge of how it works.
Right. So we have a deeper dive on this, later on in the summit. So if you have interest, let's go talk there, and we'll get good requirements from you too.
But
Because
as we learn how this all works,
yes,
and try to use this in our CDN system, and we know it takes a long time to build it up right now. So we're going to attack that, try to make it go faster, and I think we're going to probably iterate on the Comcast side first, and then based off of those learnings, we'll come back to the community and say, hey, we figured all this stuff out. This is how we do CI/CD with this. What do you think about doing this on the Apache side? Because we have much more flexibility on our
Right.
More that way than having to go through the Apache and go back and forth with it and waste a bunch of their time because we want to change it. So we got to figure that out on our side.
we're also looking at. Remember, this is demo data for our test needs. We also have a desire to build, as Jonathan says, let's make Tabletown great again. And so what we're going to do is we're going to revisit Tabletown and look at it as a reference set of data, not only just for testing, but also loading up our test environments.
Taking this to the next step, right?
Yes.
You could imagine a world where the enroller, you could sort of say, for your feature, you want to add this data through the enroller
Yes.
into this, and then it needs to work, right?
Yes.
And that would be really, really cool, because then you could sort of say, I want to build a CDN with all of these features.
Right.
Yes.
As part of the deep dive, I plan on discussing the enroller in depth.
Okay, good.
So-
In all of its glory. And one of the things Mr. Bevel's done really good is he's gone and got requirements of people that's used it so far and said, hey, we want that feedback so we can figure out how to make this more flexible and usable. So I would highly suggest going to this and understanding it so you can come back with more feedback.
So,
Jeff.
I just wanted to add, the Vinyl DNS edition that we haven't actually here yet will give you the ability to spawn multiple MIDs, multiple edges, multiple traffic drivers, and multiple traffic monitors.
And then
And multiple
also, once you
CDNs.
have final DNS integration, you can integrate it with Let's Encrypt and get your certs and do the whole thing for real, right? It's not that hard anymore. You can get certs and all that stuff for free.
So
It's really-
I'll let Jeff speak to that, but I think one of the exercises is going to decouple and make an SSL service. So you should, in theory, be able to plug and play
Yeah.
whatever your
Yeah.
SSL uses.
So
You should
Jeff
set
did a
that.
lot of the magical plumbing with all of this.
Yes.
So there's an internal self-signed CA that runs that helps create certificates that are recognizable by
It
the
doesn't have to be self-signed.
I know that, but I mean, we had to start somewhere, so we started that.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
Look at that. You should look at Caddy. Have you seen how they do it?
I'll
Look
check
at
that out.
Caddy. It's a Golang HTTP server, or yeah.
Okay.
And it basically you give it the host name, you start it up, and bang, you got to search for that host name if it's in DNS. They do all the Let's Encrypt stuff for you.
Interesting. The, this particular version of CDN Box uses a self-signed CA, so everything trusts the CA, and that CA signs all the certs, so you can do full SSL TLS validation.
Yeah.
You don't have to run everything in like insecure mode, which is really good.
Yeah.
And this is all offline too.
It's
So this is all using the
Yeah, you can-
equivalent of RFC 1918
Yeah.
IP space, but for domains.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's all self-contained, and so the Let's Encrypt thing has some external dependencies that would make it a little weird.
Look at Caddy.
I think
So,
what we should do maybe is have multiple containers that we can plug in to
Yeah.
serve that DNS function maybe and the CA function.
That's on the roadmap, owner isolation.
Yeah.
So anyways, that's our presentation. If you have any more questions. I think it's break now on the schedule. We've sort of ate into some of that, if not all.
No, it's actually perfectly on time and about 10
Okay,
seconds.
good.
So, yeah, let's take a break and we'll get back here.